Welcome to the Voodoo Power Podcast. Welcome to Plates and Pancakes. We're sitting down today with Brian Mack. Coach Mack is a Missouri State University assistant track and field, along with strength and conditioning coach. Mack oversees the field and multi-events for the Bears. In the 2023-24 season, Mack's athletes took a third-place medal at the MVC Outdoor Championships. In his first season as part of the staff, Mack saw two of his athletes to the Missouri Valley Conference Championships, medaling in both high jump and long jump. His javelin squad also built on its strong foundation during the 23 season as his top finisher threw 44.54 meters. The Bears also placed three athletes in the top 10 at the conference championships. Coach Mack comes to MSU with over 8 years of experience coaching at the collegiate level. Most recently, he served as a sprints, jumps, and strength conditioning coach at Central Washington University, where he was responsible for facilitating the strength and conditioning program, coaching, and recruiting. Since 2014, Mack has produced 3 All-Americans, 15 conference champions, 28 all-conference athletes, and 19 top 10 all-conference performers. Coach Mack obtained his Bachelor's of Science in Exercise Science from Central Washington University. He since has furthered his education, earning the certifications from National Strength Conditioning Association and the USA Track and Field Cross Country Coaches Association. So that was a mouthful, Coach. So welcome to the show.
I appreciate that. I appreciate you having me. First of all, it's this awesome opportunity to get on this podcast. You mentioned before that I've listened to this podcast before. It was funny how this podcast got passed on to me, looking it up and realizing I had listened to quite a few of those episodes. So this is exciting for me. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad you made time. I know I stumbled through that, but man, there was quite a bit in there.
I hope it gets longer later.
Well, I think
right?
I think it probably will. Knowing we have an athlete in common and some of the talent you have down there, I can't help but think it will get longer.
Thanks. Thank you.
Now, I hadn't had much experience with multi-eventers, heptathletes, things like that. And then I had an athlete come here that eventually is now you're working with. The complexity of the multi-events. How do you look at that? Do you look at it as a whole? Do you look at it as a team and you're taking the pieces of one athlete and trying to mesh them with the strengths of another? How does the global view of that?
For sure. Good question. I mean, I think that's probably answering that question is probably the foundation of how you would coach multis, or at least making sure that your success is repeatable with every athlete. And I choose to look at the multi athletes as kind of all around athletes who, if we can excel in some of the basic understandings of acceleration, max velocity running, just how to use their body, coordination, and rhythm. Rhythm's a big one I focus on. Then from there, the individual pieces of each event kind of fall into place, and they're a lot easier to communicate as opposed to learning 7 to 10 different events. If you can improve the building blocks of each event that kind of carry over, because there's a lot of carryover across the speed and power events, then you can essentially coach 2 birds with 1 stone, or maybe even more. So I like to look at it holistically, and being a strength coach as well, I like to bring that in. If I'm coaching a heptathlete, it's not 7 different opportunities. It's really 8, because I use the weight room to teach some of those core things. So I don't really like to break it up into, hey, you're an athlete that needs to be perfect and understand 7 different events, and you are going to be a 7 event athlete. It's more so you are a multi, that's 1 event, and you've got to learn the basics across the board, and then the little tips and tricks that kind of represent the top of that pyramid for every individual event.
They contrast each other so much that I think that would be where the struggle is. Let's say you have an athlete that is poor in the 800 but is incredible in the 200.
Yeah, I get that a lot.
How do you make that work, or do you just let the 800 just sit out there on its own and you take advantage of the speed of the 200?
Well, we've got to get points in all of them. So I try not to ignore anything. There are definitely some athletes that excel so much. If you get a good multi, I always like to tell my athletes, we're always working towards, if you are a competent multi and you have kind of built up and could be relevant, especially at this Division 1 level, then there should be at least one event where we can go score in an open. So of course there are strengths, and sometimes the strengths are the 200 and they contrast the 8 training for sure. Um, but the 8 you're right, it is a little tougher to plan a training cycle when there's so much speed and power work. It's not only when do you get that 800 work, but how do you not let it disrupt the speed and power work and get too much on the volume side for sure. Um, if I'm using that example of someone who's a strong 2 and the 8 is just not their thing, the first place that I start to explain to them is that we're getting a little bit of some of those tiny little puzzle pieces for the 8 across the way we're structuring everything from the capacity we're building in the fall, all the way over to bodybuilding circuits, general strength circuits, core circuits, med ball circuits. We're always doing those in sort of a 1-to-1 or sometimes 2-to-1 work to rest ratio. So we're getting some aerobic across the whole program for sure. And that right there is at least getting something. It's really meant to increase work capacity and help them once they're really in competitive season to really recover session to session, week to week, that aerobic base for sure. But at least one session a week is going to be finished with the 800. Usually that's going to be our Tuesdays. So we like to knock out our technical work early and maybe a high jump and then javelin and then finish with some tempo runs. But I'm a big fan of bike. I will say that. I think that's, to your question about how does it not interfere, I'm also very worried of that. And I'm a big speed and power guy. So maybe I'm underserving the 800 by throwing them on a bike. But on Saturdays, we will bike and do some aerobic work there. So I think between, scratching it a little bit every day with the tempos, the circuits, and the way those are structured, plus one given day on the track for an 8, and then possibly those weekend bike. Usually we can build enough at least confidence in that event to go and compete well. Now, are they going to be at the top? Probably not. My usually, unless they're coming in as an amazing 800 runner and that is their gift, I usually do not place a standard on, hey, you need, if we want to be top 3 in the multi, you have to be top 3 in the 800. Sometimes it doesn't work out that way. And I'll never force them in the top 3 of the 800 at the expense of those speed and power.
Now you talked about a little bit about the symmetry of it all and carryover from
Mm-hmm.
one event to the other. Setting up a practice where you do have, you have hurdles, which is a plyometric sprint, and you have
Yep.
the high jump, and then is it either the long jump or the triple, whichever one it
Long
is.
jump, yeah.
Will any of them have crossover within each other where you can put a focus on one event more than the other, maybe the weaker event, and then that will benefit the other two?
Oh yeah, for sure. That's the bread and butter right there. I think the more commonalities you can find, whether it is in the actual workout itself or the technical components, I just think the better they're going to learn those 7 events. So if we're talking, the examples were hurdles, long jump. What was the other one you said?
Well, you got the high jump that goes in
Oh,
there.
high jump in
Yeah,
there. Yeah, yeah,
I know they're different movements, so I
yeah, for
understand
sure.
there's going to be some issues, but you might find carryover somewhere.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, those 3 right there, I can give you the carryover. The 2 big carryovers I can think of off the top of my head are proper acceleration from a workout standpoint and rhythm, understanding rhythm. The way I like to teach those commonalities that kind of cross over is just the bare bones. Like you got to learn how to accelerate. Like I kind of teach it as you're not going to run the 100, but I want you to understand the 100-meter dash acceleration pattern. That's like our Rosetta Stone. If you can read that, you can get the other languages a little easier. So if you can understand that, I teach acceleration heavy. It's a big, it's the secondary objective in month 1 and the primary objective of month 2, which we just finished. If you can understand the acceleration pattern, then I can say we're condensing that over 8 strides for the long jump. That's a little simplistic, but that knocks out most of their learning. If you can understand that, then we can get into the hurdles. We can get you through 8. That we got to condense that over 8. And then the rhythm of it is kind of, I guess, piggybacking on acceleration, because understanding the rhythm of acceleration is part of learning acceleration. But they understand the rhythm, uh, then we can right off the bat. Yeah, I mean that's the javelin approach. That's the 200. That's the 100 hurdles. That's the long jump. That's the high jump. A lot of our setup for the event or the approach, we can really get quality efforts if they understand rhythm. So I'm teaching acceleration and rhythm as a way to kind of cross over to really like for heptathletes, 6 out of the 7. Now maybe 5 out of the 7 shot doesn't really have any sort of acceleration pattern. But I guess if they do understand rhythm, then by nature they're getting a little more coordinated. So there's probably a little bit there.
I had a long jumper here last year, and that is how I viewed it.
Mm-hmm.
Ironically enough, was if his acceleration is good coming down, and then we get him up right when he turns over, we get him up, get his hips underneath him. It should carry him through the long jump better.
No doubt.
I don't know if that's how you view it or not. There might be long jump coaches listening saying no, 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 that's not right at all. But we had success with that.
Yeah, yeah. No, I would agree. I definitely think you could break that down into like very, very technical goals and take that and kind of chop it up and say, here's what's right, here's what's wrong. But at a basic level, yeah, that's what we're trying to do. I think that speed, or at least takeoff speed, is the number one determining factor in the long jump. So if you can understand acceleration, you need to, in my opinion, you need to understand acceleration if you want to hit your maximum velocity. Not to say they need to be at 100% on the takeoff, but um, that acceleration earns you that velocity and sets up the proper upright position we want into the takeoff. So yeah, I would totally agree that coaching acceleration and understanding that rhythm is going to pay off in a lot of different events. I would say even team sports for sure. I mean, not that there's a rhythm component to the way you're using acceleration, but if we can, if you can increase your acceleration, or I mean, decrease the time through teaching that, then that just, what is our 100%? What is our ceiling? If we're using 90% on the field, that 90% is now faster. So at least part of the training, I would do the same thing with team sports.
I will say I didn't buy into it originally, but I think the more I do it, I probably am. Louis Simmons, and he talked about Barry Ross breaking the sprint down, finding out what your percentages were. So if your acceleration phase is 60% of the race, well, then 60% of your
Oh
practice
yeah.
needs to be focused on the acceleration. It seems like the more I do this, the acceleration part becomes more and more important, and the top speed just seems to take care of itself.
I would say, I mean, I have trained some team sport athletes when I was over at Central Washington. Um, and I would agree that I would spend most of my time, if I'm doing speed work with them, I would probably spend most of my time doing acceleration. I would touch on max velocity, of course. But yeah, I think the bang for your buck in a team sport is acceleration. And I'm right there with you. Even as a sprints coach, I didn't buy into at least the rhythm idea. Maybe not so that I didn't buy in. I didn't understand it fully. So I was all about, the programming, the workout itself. How far do I go? How many reps? What's the rest like? But as I became a little more knowledgeable, and that's all to, coaching education and mentorships, rhythm seems much more important than I'd realized.
Kids know how to hit top speed from the time they're very young, but their acceleration to get there seems to be what's lacking. They want to get to top speed as fast as possible, and sometimes that's not necessarily what's needed.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, when you put it like that, that is totally that aligns with everything that I've seen, and that really makes sense. Kids have just been sprinting, running since they were kids. They've touched the idea of running upright in everything they've done since they were young, since they could remember. Acceleration, no one's taught them how to do it properly. And of course, there is things you can teach at max velocity that are different than the way you're going to run as a kid, for sure. But uh, yeah, when you put it like that, it seems pretty obvious that acceleration is lacking because the reps of acceleration, or even thinking about it, to upright running is thousands to one.
I'm sure even at the college level, if you have a conversation with an athlete about the phases of the race, you find yourself using a whiteboard or trying to explain it more than you thought you might have to.
Oh, no doubt, no doubt. I literally have done that. The whiteboard drawings, the stick figures, uh, all of it. And even at the college level, I mean, our athletes, when they come in, they have to learn that. I remember hearing Vince Anderson talk about his training and acceleration, and he would say every single time they accelerate, he has to tell them over and over again, you got to push, you got to push. Do not push as hard as you want to. Do not push as hard as you think you need to still feel fast. You've got to push. And he says, year and a half in, it clicks. So it takes a while for sure. And you get a lot of athletes that I put it this way. I'm very fortunate and lucky if I get an athlete who really knows how to accelerate out of high school.
I would say the same thing.
Yeah, and that's really what you've got to choose what you can do at high school, because I mean the track coaches are overrun, man. The athlete to coach ratio is just insane. I find myself complaining about my setup and how I have to stagger practices, and I'm like, man, nothing I'm doing is even close to high school. I don't know what I'm complaining about.
So acceleration's role in the display of full speed. To me,
Mm.
I look at it like lifting weights. You have to work up to your max. You just can't load the bar with the max. The workup seems to help display the strength. Is that how you view the acceleration? The better and longer the acceleration, the better display of speed there is?
Um, for the most part, I think in regards to, I guess there's two ways to look at it: the teaching side of it, and then the actual, if we're talking the physical output, what equals what and what affects what. The teaching, absolutely. When we're doing a lot of work in these first 2 months that require some proficiency at upright running, I really tell my younger athletes, like, you cannot be expected to hit these positions at an A plus if we haven't got to acceleration, because you earn that position by acceleration. So the more proficient the acceleration, I wouldn't say the more proficient the acceleration, the better the max velocity, but there's kind of a ceiling in how fast and how quality those runs can be until you learn, how to earn it really. And then when it comes to the actual output, um, I would say you do see a trend that the faster the max velocity, the faster or the longer the acceleration phase is. Um, I would say that's something that's kind of a not really a cause, it's more of an effect. The faster you are, the longer it's going to take you to get up to those really high velocities. But extending your acceleration phase for the sake of it won't yield a faster velocity, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah. It has to be beneficial and not just staying
Yeah,
in it to stay in it.
exactly. You gotta earn it for sure.
With the better accelerations, and we'll get the top speed. I don't want it to be all about acceleration, but I think it's important, and I need to know a lot more about it. So that's where a lot of these questions are coming from. But the better the acceleration, do you find it keeps them from too much lactic work? Like, as that improves, do you see it get more alactic, so now you can take more reps?
Um, that's tough because I kind of probably, I mean, if I was concerned or thought about the total amount of reps we're doing, I would probably be able to notice that they could. My big thing when I'm accelerating or progressing that acceleration is I'm always trying to progress intensity. And so intensity is my primary objective, and the volume is kind of what is just comes out of the intensity. It's just related to it. It's not its own goal or anything. So right now, I would say, like, I'll give you an example for where we're at. We're just finishing cycle two. Right now, they could absolutely handle more volumes of acceleration if we wanted to ramp it up to 15 reps or something like that, or get to that 300 meters of volume. We absolutely could, because of the work we've been doing, the 2 months of acceleration work. It does build a base, and it does allow for more volume of reps. And I probably go that route for team sport athletes. If that's a concern, it is in terms of their sport. They have just repeated effort, repeated effort, repeated effort. For track, I'm trying to improve intensity, or at least progress intensity. So I'll get to a point like right around now where I could go higher in the volume, but what I want is to spike up, go out of block, start competing, up the intensity and the execution and competition. And because the intensity will start to rise, I always drop the volume. So if I needed to continue to do what we did this cycle, which is a lot of 2 point starts, a lot of turf accelerations, most of it in flats, we absolutely could do more volume. We could handle way more for sure. I just don't take it that route, if that makes sense. We could veer off and go that way. The work we've done would support that, but I go in a different direction.
Once season starts for you, it gets pretty busy pretty fast. I mean, you go into indoor in a month and a half,
Yeah,
and then you go right into spring. So
yeah,
managing the volume now while preparing them is a little bit of a balancing act, I would imagine.
no doubt, no doubt. Yeah, I'm always wary of that balance between intensity and volume, and when they start to get a little too high, both, that's when we start to see some injuries. So uh, that's I mentioned doing a lot in flats, doing a lot in turf, doing a lot in 2 point. We do that to keep the load on the body a little bit lower so that we can kind of build that capacity uh, early in the season. And then, once we're in competition, it's really just about staying sharp and kind of polishing what hopefully we've earned in the fall. So, yeah, it's definitely a balancing act. But that is why, once we get into competition, a lot of the other menu items might change to help balance that single quality for sure.
We had talked about this as we was kind of setting this up and building questions and bouncing ideas off each other, but building the first three steps, it seems
Yeah.
like the first step comes easy. The second step takes a little bit more work. Once you get past the second, those steps really get hard to develop. What are some things that you're doing to get those three really good steps?
Yeah, yeah. The three are super important. I remember being really young in coaching career and trying to learn as much. And one of the things that always stuck with me is an apprenticeship at Altus. Dan Paff said, if you nail the first three steps, you got a pretty good chance of setting yourself up for a good run. Those first three are, yeah, those first three are where I think physically most athletes are going to have the physical ability to do it better than they do it at any given time. It is battling the, I want to be as fast as possible. I want to feel fast. So I'm going to do these things that make me feel fast. Their internal perception of fast, but externally, they may not be the most efficient things. I do like to slow things down. I think that's great for learning. And in regards to acceleration, slowing things down means we're also getting a lot of physical output. Slowing things down are going to help us feel those shin angles, feel the length of our pushes and these big ranges of motion. But there's a physical advantage to slowing things down, doing things like sled and hills. They really lend themselves to the kind of pushing strength you need. Whereas like a max velocity run, I can only slow those down enough before I'm not really doing max velocity. So slowing things down, acceleration helps me learn, but it's also conducive to the physical, gains there. I do a lot of sled. And I like to do some pretty heavy sled for the first couple steps. I like to really slow it down. I really like to force them to understand how to get long and big and kind of fight that internal urge to associate what they feel as fast as actually covering distance, which is spinning their wheels, really. Um, I used to do a lot of wall drills. I'm sure you've seen those kind of marches, angled A marches and that kind of stuff. And I do that a lot for team sport athletes to create just a little, I guess, like all drills, a little bit of context of what these positions should feel like. Um, it does help when it comes to sprint time. I always get the question, what should it feel like? What should it feel like? And at least the wall drills can provide a reference point. It should feel a lot like the wall drills. I also have them do wall drills wrong sometimes to show them what they're doing in those first three steps, really, opening that shin up, getting vertical contacts instead of more horizontal shin angles. I show them how weird it feels on the wall. Be like, it's all about creating some reference for them to go back to. So I like to slow it down and do a lot of sled. I do a lot of film early on those acceleration days to show them. Um, but I would say as the reps go farther out, I'll lower the resistance. I like to do some pretty heavy sleds for the first 10 meters, a little bit lighter out to 20, even lighter out to 30. And then after that, um, I'll rarely resist them after 30 meters. If I was actually training a really high level track athlete, that might be something I go into just to create a new stimulus. They're just so good that they need something. But for my level, I think most of the resisted 30 under. And last thing I want to do um, teaching is slow them down at max velocity because it's really hard just to get that stimulus that we want. So acceleration is probably no, there's no real secret sauce to that. It's just a lot of sled. I've started playing around with the Exergini resisted run. I've really enjoyed that. Um, a lot of hills as well. Hills I do a lot in month one where I'm not getting super technical, but the hill forces angles. So I can get a lot of volume in there without being worried that they're not technically proficient enough to handle the volume. Hills just kind of force it. So yeah,
I just took an incredible amount of notes, so I'll work through them and we'll see where they end up. But going back very early on in that conversation, I believe Charlie Francis said that when Ben Johnson learned how to run the middle part of the race in the stages, that's when he became unbeatable. Like
yeah, yeah.
yeah, he learned it didn't pay to be too fast, too fast.
I would it's funny that idea that middle phase is so important. Um, I would say that I see that a lot in pretty good sprinters. Like most of the sprinters we're going to get at college, even the high level ones, they're not perfect. No one's perfect. But those really good sprinters, it is actually the middle phase that they struggle with. Once they start to understand the position that they're supposed to be in, once they understand the beginning, the acceleration, how to slow down, there's that middle phase where they've almost got it and they just want to get there. And it's like, no, you got 10, 15 meters more of just a little more patience, a little more push to fully earn that. So I guess the more experienced sprinters, that's definitely the phase that I see they struggle with for sure.
And I think at the high school level, they can get away with not worrying about it. But as the
Yeah,
levels increase, then now the importance of actually knowing the race comes into play.
that middle phase is when you see like good sprinters in college. That middle phase might be if you've got a eight finalists in the 100-meter dash final at say a Division One. Most of them they're there for a reason, right? So most of them are good. Most of them got great PRs. Most of them, if they're in a final Division One, they're good accelerators because a lot of these programs are hammering acceleration. But that middle phase for those elite sprinters is when, how do I say this? If you rush that phase, you tie up at the end. You just get caught in this not quite A plus position. It's just under it. You could get away with it anywhere else, but when you're really erasing elite sprinters, that can be a make or break right there. In the difference between getting up to top speed and it's 0.86 meters or 0.86 per 10-meter fly versus a 0.87 is going to make a difference in those elite levels. So it is super important for sure.
You were talking about wall drills.
Yeah, yeah.
We do quite a few wall ISO drills. So we'll let them come off the ground like they're coming out of the blocks or coming out of a 3-point stance. Football players come into the wall and then find that ISO and get their body right. And it's amazing
Mm-hmm.
what elements of weakness you see and what elements of strength you see. I don't know if that's ever anything you've ever tinkered with or not.
No, I've actually never done. Are you saying they're down low? They're down low, and then they get that initial push into the wall drill. Oh yeah, yeah. I've never actually done that. But I bet if I can think of athletes right now who have problems really getting that triple extension, that posted up position out of that initial step. And I bet that if we did that drill, I would see that same problem.
Where it helped me a lot was I could start looking at the hamstring, the glute, or the foot. So if they hit that wall and that drive leg has got a bend in it, like the knees going to the ground,
Hmm.
well, then I can start evaluating, okay, where are they weak that they can't hold that ISO hold?
Gotcha,
Or is
gotcha.
it just technique? That's something I've jacked with. And then you can add a switch in if you want, and then hit an
Hmm.
ISO, switch ISO. If you've got a good enough wall, you can take them back almost 2 steps. So they get one big push and then they're into the wall. Same thing.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
I don't know how effective that is. I mean, we seem to be making some pretty fast kids, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think honestly, I think anything that you could do, you mentioned the idea that you can start to figure out whether it's technical or a strength issue. I think anything you can do that helps pinpoint which side is going to be the biggest bang for your buck. And a lot of times they're like kind of together, but any drill that allows you as the coach to narrow it down, I think is fantastic. I mean, that's kind of the holy grail of drills is making sure we're not doing random ones just for the sake of doing drills, that finding a purpose. And there's very few purposes out of a drill that I would find more important or useful than to know immediately, is this a strength issue? Is this a technical thing? I mean, that would guide what I'm doing from there on out. So I think that's great.
I had a little bit of help on it, man, because I had some kids, and I'm like, I can't figure out where they're weak. They should be strong here, and they can't hold this position. And then I had some really good coaches start pointing me to the foot. You know, you think you've got all these things strengthened up, and then all of a sudden you find out that foot's not strong enough to hold them in position. Well, that really blows your mind. And then now you're struggling through finding out, I got to learn this much more on top of what I thought I knew.
Yeah. I don't think you can undervalue the foot in sprinting, or I guess in getting into any proper position. I don't think you can undervalue the foot. That's just another thing, early on in my career is just figuring out, like, again, the acceleration, it was just what workout, learning about rhythm, learning about the foot. It's just you're right. It's another thing, but it's where it starts. That's where the force comes through. So yeah, definitely can't be undervalued. When you're doing these ISOs, how long are you holding them? I've never done them, so I might try them out. So
3 to 5 seconds. You're gonna long enough that you can adjust them. So if they hit the wall and you're kind of looking down, you're like, okay, well, he's sagging here in his knee. And then get him into the position that feels right and looks right. Hold that, then try again. And then before too long, they're hitting that position to begin with. 3 to 5 seconds seems to be more than enough. I mean, especially if you're just looking for the feeling of what feels good. I'm not trying to burn it into them. I'm just trying to get them where they can find it on their own, where they hit that wall, they go right to that position and hold it.
For sure. That 3 to 5 seconds. I like that. Make it a little dynamic so they can feel things, or at least that you can start to see how they move and you could show them. And that 3 to 5 seconds, anything where they can now become more aware of their positions, I think is fantastic. I might steal that one from you.
Well, if you want to steal it, have at it. I don't know that it's that awesome, but it's helped me. And then once I started watching them take off and accelerate, then I could combine the two in my head and figure out, okay, he looks exactly like that on the wall. So we can run all we want to run, but until he can hit that on the wall, he's never going to hit it in a sprint.
No doubt. That is actually, that little idea right there is huge in regards to how I coach in the weight room. Like, it's the same thing. You can get them to feel positions doing certain exercises or lifts, but they also, you might be able to see a common movement pattern weakness that, when you're looking at it in the full sprint or the full activity, there's so much going on. But if you see that same thing in a wall drill or in a power clean or something like that, it just only illuminates, one, where do you go to coach this athlete? And two, the amount of opportunities you have to kind of iron that thing into their brain as the right position.
Now, we use that on our acceleration days, the wall drill.
Mm-hmm.
But once I noticed that, well, then I took the A-skip into an A-skip ISO.
A-skip ISO?
For top speed.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I like that. Now that I'm thinking about my program, I think there are a couple opportunities where I am doing something similar to an ISO. I love it. How do you do it?
So I'll essentially get them A-skipping and where that's free and good, and then I'm all right. We're gonna hit this and we're gonna hold it. Knee up, toe up, chest up, hold. Then you can see what that back leg looks like. 3 to 3 seconds. Switch, hold, 3 seconds. That way each leg is working, and then you can see what their work capacity is. Because if they can only do 5 steps at 15 seconds, well, what can they do out on the track? So it kind of it allows you to build work capacity, I think, but it also, just like the wall drill, allows you to build that backside, see if the foot's weak, see if they're hitting on their foot, see if they're hitting on their toe. It slows it down for somebody that's a little slow like me. that I can see where some deficiencies are, and it's amazing how taxing that is on them when they just finish 5 steps. You know,
Uh-huh. Yeah, that same thing as that Wolder. I bet if I were to do something like that, I might hold A positions, but a little more dynamic, the idea of switching. Yeah, I bet you I would see the same issues that I'm seeing at top speed. I think I'd see a lot of those. I bet my athletes that like to sit when they run at top speed, I would see that switch. They just wouldn't want to be tall. They just don't want to be up there. So I bet I would see a lot of that same stuff.
the one thing I noticed, and I'm still not 100% sure on how to coach it, but I have
Hmm.
noticed it, is you can separate your athletes that drive the knee up as opposed to your athletes that project the knee. So now you know what ground you're covering. If you've got a good knee
Gotcha.
projector, you're covering more ground. And
Yeah.
Charlie Francis gets into all that, but I'm still just not sure how. And then how do you coach that at top speed? Hey, I need your knee to go forward, not up. Well, if they're naturally springy, you're
Yeah.
totally changing everything about the way they run. But I can see it now. And then in that age skip, we can start working on projecting forward as opposed to maybe so far up.
Yeah. Yeah. Just straight up. Yeah, I bet that's actually a really good, kind of observation for that drill is what is that knee doing? What is that hip doing as it's moving? Like I would probably, like I just said, my bias would be to look at the foot that's, the position and stuff. But yeah, there's what is the hip doing is I probably where it starts. But um, yeah, the idea of projecting that hip and knee forward and up and not just up, it is a hard thing. Max velocity is a hard one to teach. Everything's moving so fast. There's not a lot they can think about. And if you slow it down too much, you're now not hitting max velocity. It is definitely a hard one. Um, I can't remember who gave me this cue. Someone gave me a cue when I'm doing a lot of dribbling drills. The idea that when that hip moves forward, the initial movement off the ground being like you're kicking someone in the shin, so that it's not backwards. We don't have a lot of backside mechanics. It's not straight up. It's up and forward. That has worked pretty well for me, at least in the drills. And then if they get better at with the drills, it's always a point of reference when they actually go sprint. But that idea of kicking someone in the shin really worked for me.
That's the whole thing I had tried to figure out a little bit in my head how to cue that. I had taken the A skip ISO and then into with no acceleration, so it wouldn't be top speed, but essentially come out of that A skip ISO into a sprint so that once you got that hip projecting, they could come out of that and feel that for a couple steps. Well,
Yeah, feel it.
now that they felt it, maybe we can get somewhere with it. I don't know that that's the right way to go about it, but that's what we were trying.
I actually do something similar. I think, well, I hope there's something to it because I do something similar. I'm a big fan of dribbles, which is kind of like ankling. But I'll take them through a progression. Well, I'll dribble over the calf, or I'm sorry, the ankle a little higher to the calf and to the knee, and then we'll hit a sprint segment. I'm trying to dial into what is correct. And then when they sprint, it's like you got to go. Don't feel fast, just feel correct. You know, and it's a good movement screen when you try and get them moving correctly in a drill. The moment they sprint, you can just see what breaks apart for sure. I bet you see the same thing when you're doing your A's and then they go to sprint. I bet you see uh, their immediate need to just break that position and just do what they think is fast.
And I've learned a lot about their facial expressions and how they look. You can tell when it clicks. They may not be able to hold it, but something changed in their mind about how they felt. And then
Oh yeah,
now you can really get in there and work on some
that's the
stuff.
greatest. Those that look or those moments, man, those are the ones that recharge you on the day. You know?
I yes, I love to take the bound and turn it into whatever it is we're doing. So a lateral bounds into acceleration or a high knee bound into top speed style sprint. It seems like that just clicks for him. I don't know.
I
Maybe it
can see
does.
that.
Maybe it's just me. I don't know. That seems to work for us.
I can see a bound doing a lot. You know, my freshmen that come in, they do have struggles at top speed, understanding that they're projecting themselves down the track. They're really a lot of them. Their perception of sprinting is just trying hard and trying to move their limbs fast. And I'm not to say that's not important, but the idea of you're trying to project yourself across space and project the hips, and stride length is not how far you can reach your leg, it's how far your hips are moving in flight. And so that's a common struggle. And the idea of bounding, like getting them to create some flight time, getting them to project their hips into a sprint, probably does create some pretty good context of something closer to where you want to be.
Another one of the notes I had from that really good run you had a minute ago was slowing the acceleration down with sleds, chains, so you can
Yeah,
see
yeah.
it. How slow will you get? Are you looking for a break in form? If, like, let's say you hook a kid up and they're pretty heavy and they break form, will you give them another chance to see if they adjusted to that, or are you just like, nope, we need to lighten the load? How do you determine what load to put on them?
That's a really good question. That's actually why I'm a huge or becoming slowly, I'm becoming a big fan of exergenius because it allows me to track the weight way better. Sleds, they're great, but it's just a fixed weight. We don't have an endless supply of weight plates, so there's only a few weight options we can do. So it depends if we're really early on trying to nail the first three steps. I will move it pretty heavy to where I would say they I, I I don't really have a specific weight. What I'm looking for is when I'm trying to coach those first three steps, I want a weight that's heavy enough that keeps them in that position, that prevents them from rising. And even though I'm only working on the first three or maybe the first 10 meters, we're not going three steps or 10. I'll hook the extra genie up or a heavy sled and have them go over 20 meters. And it's heavy enough to where they have to push, they've got to dig, and they're stuck at that angle for the whole 20-meter rep. So what weight that specifically is, it's just like dependent on the athlete's body weight and strength levels. I just kind of experiment, and that's a lot of the first couple sessions is figuring out what weight is going to keep them there. With the exergenia, I'm starting to get to the point where I'm tracking it a little more because there's objective values that I can go up by, I don't know, a pound each time. So I find a weight that works in terms of if I crank it to a weight and I see them going through that 20 meters and they're starting to climb, they're starting to rise. I want it a little heavier. So the nice thing about coaching track that I don't know if I would transfer over to team sports is that there is, even if they're not great at acceleration, there is just a little bit of technical efficiency that is higher than normal. So rarely do I find a problem with track athletes where the weight is too heavy to where the form goes down. Usually, if it's heavy, they actually nail the angles, and if it's too heavy, they just can't move. I rarely get an athlete where if it's too heavy, they start doing some weird things. Uh it just gets really, really slow. Eventually it becomes an acceleration walk. But with track athletes, I'm lucky because there's just a little bit of ingrained technical proficiency to where I don't ever get into the scenario where the weight's too high and it looks worse. It just looks slower. Now, if the weight's too low, then it's not slowing them down enough and they're just doing the same technical mistakes. But I've found when the weight's pretty high, they really can create some good shin angles and really push through. I tell them they've got to feel the glute on each step. And if they're doing those things well, if they've got good posted up 45-degree, we'll just call it 45-degree, they've got good shin angles, they're completing their hip extension and feeling that glute on each step, then I can just, if I crank it up more, it just becomes a slower version of that all the way down the walks, and then they can't move. So rarely do I get too heavy.
Yeah, so you could run an ISO from the opposite direction of a wall if you really wanted to.
Yeah, yeah. You know, but with team sport athletes, I've done it before. I've done pretty heavy sled, and it's not quite the same. When it's too heavy, I do see a lot of breaking at the waist and pulling harder. I don't see that a lot with the track athletes, and maybe that's just because I've been lucky. Um, but with team sport athletes, yeah, there's probably a window there. It's too light, you're just not slowing it down. it's too heavy, they might do some wonky things to try and move that resistance or whatever it is. Um, so I wish I could give you a better answer in terms of the specific weight or anything, but uh, it's very, very hard. If I had more extra genies, which I'm gonna start campaigning to my head coach to get, maybe I could check back with you in a couple months and give you a better idea of what those weights actually are. But right now, it's a lot of eye test.
Do you notice that when you take the weight off of them and you line them up to run accelerated, unweighted, that if they
Yeah,
haven't been used to getting in them body positions, that first sprints, they're not used to that power and they have to
usually.
adjust?
Oh yeah, usually the first rep they stumble.
Yes. Yeah.
They stumble. Do you see that too?
Yes, that's why I was asking. I wanted to make sure it was something I was seeing that was legitimate. But yeah,
Yeah,
they're
yeah,
in the ground so hard that I assume they're in the ground so hard that it actually will make them stumble. Yes.
yeah. They really, really, they just push way better, but they still, at least this is kind of my guess. Um, we clean up the effort and we clean up the push, but when we take the weight away, they still don't have the timing. They still don't know how to be patient with it, so they end up stumbling. They don't post up yet. They just get right to that first step, and it's powerful and it's fast and they feel good, but they're not quite balanced. But in my experience, um, give them a couple reps, and I do see, I don't see perfection, but I do see improvement. And I think it's just because they have more context of what it should feel like. But yeah, that first rep is usually a stumble, regardless of whether it's a walk on or a senior, really trained sprinter. That first one's always a little bit of a mess.
I've gotten to where I like to do the resisted, maybe with chains, resisted starts from a kneeling position. I don't know if you do any of that. Would you see any benefit in starting them like that?
For track, if we're doing kneeling and it's all linear, for sure. I know you mentioned before the podcast, sometimes kneeling and then a turn. Is that correct? A turn into a sprint.
Some of my baseball guys, I might set them in a 60-degree kneeling start or a
Yeah,
60
yeah.
stance kneeling start and then let them come out that way. But most of the time it's straight on.
I've definitely done some, working with team sport athletes. When I've worked with rugby and soccer, I've definitely done a lot more variance in how they're starting the acceleration. And a lot of those team sport athletes, they're just not familiar with a block position. So when kneeling gets the job done, when really what I'm trying to get is the hips lower. If I'm doing block work and I don't want to go out of blocks yet, we'll go from like a 4 point and they'll pretend it's blocks or something like that. But with a team sport, they don't have the context of what the blocks are supposed to feel like. And then you got to mess with their settings. And it's like, no, that's not how you do it. So kneeling is actually a way to accomplish the goal of getting the hips lower without having to make sure that they can, even know what a block start position feels like. Um, but for our track athletes here, we will do I usually don't do kneeling. What I did in the past, I've gotten away from this just because my numbers got larger, but I found some pretty good results in technical improvement when I do vary the activity. When they get to a certain level of understanding how to do it, but sometimes they can't nail it in big pressure moments or they forget it sometimes. But when they're that level, and they're pretty good accelerators. Varying the skill does help them understand what about that skill makes it the skill. So I've done kneeling starts. I've done starts with a PVC pipe. I've done starts when they're on their back and they've got to get up and go. Once they get good enough, then you have to vary the learning for there to be any improvement. So even though that stuff is not specific at all to a track athlete, I've done it before. And I have seen some pretty good results in terms of going from a B to an A. I wouldn't do it with anyone who's less than a B. I got to keep it simple for them. But once they're pretty efficient accelerators, varying the way they're starting, aside from the physical gain of the sport specificity, it does challenge the learning because you just throw them some curveballs and they have to find out what it is about the movement that makes it still correct.
What I've found that I think I like about the kneeling start is it syncs up the arm and the leg. It's amazing to me how many athletes you see that they're almost cross
Oh,
firing in their arms and
yeah,
legs. And then
yeah,
I
yeah,
don't know
yeah.
what that does. It seems to give them more time to get everything in sync.
Mhm.
That
So
was something I had noticed.
when they're kneeling, when you have them doing kneeling, are they starting? I mean, I imagine they're kneeling like 90 degrees at the knees and one knee's up, and then arms are reciprocal at 90 degrees as well.
They,
Okay, okay.
yeah, yeah. And then, you want to see that big reach when you start watching some of maybe your poorer accelerators and their
Hmm.
arms and legs aren't jiving. They're not
They're not
working
synced up.
together. They're not
Yeah,
synced up. And it takes three or four of those starts, it seems like, to finally pull that into timing.
I could see that. I mean, if you're starting at a lower, lower hip height, um, you've got to get so much more push out of that front knee that's up to get you rolling. And it seems like that would be a great exercise to get the athletes to how do I say it? Kind of experiment with their own movement pattern to find out what is going to help me drive this front leg up from this really low position. And I would imagine as they're trying to work through that, how do I get more? How do I get more? The arms get involved.
That's something I just accidentally stumbled on. That wasn't what I was looking for when I did that. It just seemed to be a byproduct of putting them in that position.
Really, really. So if those athletes, the ones that are, you get them in that kneeling position, they're not quite synced up. If they're doing, let's say, just a traditional 2 point start, um, what does that look like if their arms aren't synced up? Like, what are you seeing that makes you go, that's not quite right?
It
I'm seeing
just
if I should maybe try this, is
I
what I'm
don't
getting at.
it almost, and I had gotten it into thinking that along this line, and then I got to talk to Joel Smith, and he had kind of noticed it too. But it's almost like they're cross firing, like their arms are in the wrong lead with their legs, and they're almost running. They're almost at least starting with the arm and the leg on the same side in tandem, as opposed to broken in a cross crawl pattern.
Okay.
So by putting them in a kneeling start, it gives them more time to figure out how to get in, because you need that opposite arm to get up
Hmm.
from the
Hmm.
kneel. So now it
Yeah,
puts it they don't even know how they learned it. They just learned it.
yeah. I think that's a great way of teaching. If you can find a drill that allows them to explore their own movement and how to solve those problems themselves, that's a great drill. That's a great drill.
We talked a lot about acceleration, sprinting, things like that, but you're also a strength conditioning coach. And
Yeah, yeah.
other than your throwers, I can't imagine a lot of those athletes are just dying to be in the weight room. How do you
It's
sell the
a
weight room to them?
it's a pretty large gap there. There's a wide spectrum of love for the weight room for sure. And yeah, you get the types that are not big fans of putting up a lot of weight, let alone being in there. And then you get the people that love it for sure, that tie their PRs to their ability to PR on the track. If PRs here, then I'm in a good shot of PRing there. Some people just they work like that. I was definitely one of those athletes. But yeah, you're not going to get, not everyone's going to be a thrower. The throwers love the weight room. Um, how do I sell it? You know, when we all get there at the beginning of the year, we do have an initial first meeting. It's kind of a more of a presentation where I will show them the entire program and I will go through kind of not every single workout, but like acceleration, max velocity, all this kind of stuff. Here's a technical day and what we're trying to get out of that and what its purpose is. So the way I sell it to them is I give them a little bit of a oversimplistic look at the force velocity curve, and I show them that, and I kind of sell it as um, if we can improve up at the top and we can connect the dots, then we should be able to get some improvement down there. And I pretty much say everything that we're trying to do essentially physically in these events is to produce more force in less time. And I sell it to them by saying that this isn't a separate practice. It's not its own sport for them. It's just an extension of practice. We're trying to improve force or time with our plyometrics, with our med balls, with our sled. This is just another modality. So I just sell it as the whole reason why we're doing these med ball throws, the whole reason why we're giving you some resistance in these accelerations is force and improving force over time. This is just another way to do it. Um, and then the other one I like to use is I like to lean on the competitive side and say, if your competitors are doing it and you're not, it makes it that much harder to compete with those men and women that are maybe they may not be in love with the weight room too, but they're doing it and they're doing it well. Um, so I've been very fortunate that the ones that are not big fans of the weight room, there's still no issues with buying into the program in whole and wanting to be coachable and do the things. Um, because for every athlete that doesn't like the weight room, the athletes that do hate 300s, but again, it's just a small part of the puzzle that is necessary. And if we leave it out because we want to do what we want to do, it's going to be very difficult to beat the people who are doing what they know they need to, regardless of whether they like it or not.
Now, we had talked about how long your season goes from December until end of May.
Yeah.
Those athletes go home. They're
Oh
they're
man,
they're burnt out. They're ready for a mental break. Fall rolls around, you're starting to get them back. Now you're starting your program. What does that look like? Is it a tier? Are you working through phases? How do you start the next season?
for sure. As far as the training side of it, we'll start very first week. We will actually start with testing. I know that might sound crazy. It might sound a little too intense for week one. I leave a lot out. I'm not going to test them in a 300 or a 150, but we'll test in a fly. We'll test in acceleration. We'll test in a standing long jump and a standing triple jump. And then what's the other ones? Overhead back throw and an underhand forward throw. We'll just do some base power testing that first week. Um, and with those numbers, there's not a lot to project performance wise because it's so early, but it does give them something to some objective feedback of where they're at. We can compare it to previous years if they're a returning athlete. I can start to give them ideas of where we need to be by the time competition rolls around. So mentally, that gets the ball rolling for sure. And then for there, we are doing phases. That first month, I like to do 3 weeks on, 1 week off. That first month is all about building capacity for everything that we need in that last month of the season, really. So everything that we've got in the program in the last month of training, we're doing in month one, but at a very rudimentary level. So you're going to see all of it. I've done a short to long before. I've never done a long to short, but I'm more of a concurrent style. So we're doing it all. It's just kind of really reduced, I guess, proficiency. It's very, very far. If we're talking, bond or check, it's those lower levels. I think general prep and I can't remember the actual terminologies, but it's down there. So month one is all about building a base of accelerations, building a base of work capacity through light tempo runs on like Tuesday, a lot of circuits, a lot of med ball circuits, a lot of bodybuilding circuits, um, building a capacity for plyometrics. So they're very low intensity, vertical hops and stuff for time and the turf, really low intensity, shallow horizontal bounds. They may be standing long jumps, a double standing long jump, things like that, that will all be in the program later, just a lot more intense and the exercises change. But that's kind of how I start month one. And it's not till month two where we start to get a little technical. We start to have some technical expectations in those accelerations. So I would say I'm concurrent. I hit both ends and they kind of meet in the middle. But once we get into that second month and I'm diving a little deeper into getting specific, it's much more on the acceleration end than trying to get specific on the speed endurance end or even the event work. Like we still hit pieces. The big focus on month two is acceleration. And then we get to month three and we start to put the pieces together. We've built a physical base of what we've done. We've kind of done a lot of part practice of the event work. And the goal in month three is to start putting, hopefully, this improved physical, or at least capacity or specific strength for our event with the technical components and start to put them together a little bit. That's when we start to do full approach runs. We start to do wicket runs where we're now blending our acceleration into top speed and starting to put it together. We're starting to do short approach jumps, putting things together. And then from there, it's, I'd like to say it's all event work, but who knows what they do over winter break? That's just every college track coach's nightmare is winter break. And then once we get back in the season, it's a lot of either very specific event work or resting and recovery to get them ready for that next session.
So when you start the weight room, it's building capacity, but slowly the capacity leaves the weight room and hits the track.
For sure. In the weight room, we're doing, I'm a big fan in the weight room of keeping it simple. I'm of the idea that the more simple an exercise, the higher the output, the more power output, at least, and the more thinking involved or the more complicated the exercise, the more we have to slow things down. So if what I'm doing is about intensity, I really can't complicate it too much. So I like to keep a lot of the same elements in the weight room, a lot of the same exercises in the weight room, and we progress the intensity as opposed to progressing through by changing the exercises. I like to keep a lot of them the same. So in the weight room, month one, we're definitely doing quite a few sets of Olympic lifts. We're hitting 6x5, relatively light, 60%, that twice a week, month one. And then squats is 5x5, 70%. So we're definitely starting to build a base of power for sure. Even in those squats, 60%, sometimes 70, it does get them sore. It does. But we are hyper focused on the bar speed of those as well. So it's all just about getting a big base of power work so that when we really start to ramp up the power, we can handle the fact that it's a little bit lower volume, but it is higher intensity. And then from there, each month, those percentages kind of go up by around 10%, drop in 6x5 to 6x4 to 6x3, that kind of thing. Pretty simple.
The one thing you do use down there is Sparta testing, and I wasn't super familiar with that until I got to talking to some guys about it. What do you see in using that has helped fix deficiencies?
Um, I don't know if we've just now gotten to the point where we're using Sparta to kind of put them in buckets of what their deficiency is. Um, and that's been a big help from one of our trainers, our head trainers, in giving me that information. So we just kind of started blending the data we get back from Sparta into my weight room and my practices. Before, it's been kind of a tool to uh, not predict injuries, but just kind of, be on alert based on what we see. Um, so it's not going to be until this week where we're going to get the Sparta data back and say, have we moved them from inefficient at the drive over to within, healthy limits? So that's something we just started this year. Up until now, Sparta's main use has been to continue to foster communication and a relationship between strength coach, sport coach, and athletic trainer. That we're all looking at the same numbers and we can all kind of bring our own observations to the table. Athletic training doesn't get to see practice often, and even when they do, they don't know what they're looking at. So they've got that data. The strength coach may be able to see things, what their weaknesses are, where they're starting to get banged up, and then the sport coach observes things. And if we're starting to notice a trend across all those three, hey, we were high jumping and that her left foot, that takeoff foot, she said was bothering a little bit. I don't know how bad it is. We'll see on the Sparta, she's veering to the right now. So now we know there needs to be some sort of intervention there. So that's been its main use, is actually just helping the athletes stay healthy and helping us try to make more informed decisions. In regards to ironing out deficiencies, we can identify them and we can use the advised exercises to move them out of that deficiency. Whether or not that's going to happen or how quick that's going to happen, that's actually what we're trying right now.
And it's all force plate based on the
Yeah,
information
yeah,
you're getting back.
yeah. So I'm not sure how reliable the vert test is in itself and how high they're going, but it is consistent. We get to see trends of decrease or increase for sure.
We had talked about this, and you can see different things. You can see if they're weak in the push off. You can see
Yeah.
where they're kind of weak in that curve of the vertical, like you just
Hmm.
said. Is there any way to slow a lift down where you could see that and see if it matches up to the force plate? And now what I'm saying there is, okay, so a kid's weak coming off the floor, starting their initial push in their vertical jump. Could you, without maxing, slow that a box squat down, let's say, and see if there's a hang up or a mini max in there that would correlate with the Sparta?
Um, I think I would say, yeah, it'd be experimental, but I don't see any reason why. I think if we're looking at the three categories that our head trainer kind of put people in, it's the load, the eccentric drop, this middle phase. I can't remember what they called it, but it's essentially conversion. How are you converting that eccentric to concentric, and then that drive phase is that final triple extension. How well are you doing that? So I would imagine that at least for me, the people in the drive category, I can see in their hang cleans and that kind of stuff that they don't want to fully triple extend. They want to kind of sit a little bit. So in that category, I could definitely see it in the weight room. The problem is the is the first two groups. They're really hard to pinpoint in a lift. Um, I would imagine that group that's tough at conversion would probably have some issues with uh, any sort of, like you said, box squat or a box vertical, a seated vertical or something like that. I would imagine they'd have a lot of trouble getting momentum going out of that position. Um, but I don't have enough experience to say if I lined them all up and did like a seated box jump or something like that, or box squats, and I started to notice that the people in that category really cannot get moving. Um, I think there would be a little bit of crossover there. I think I would be able to see it for a lot of people, but I haven't done it, so it's hard to say whether I could slow things down. I mean, theoretically, you think you should, right? If you understand what is the problem that's putting him in that box, you slow it on an exercise that is hyper fixated on that quality. I'm sure you could. I just haven't done it yet.
The only reason why I was asking about that is you see multiple athletes and you see mini maxes in them all at different phases
Mhm.
of a box squat, let's say. Some of them are not really good coming off the box. Some of them are really good coming off the box, but that middle phase in there is not very good. They kind of stick in
Yeah.
there. And then some aren't very good at the lockout. Some aren't very good at getting down onto the box without plopping or dropping and maintaining speed. So for the gyms and people working with athletes that don't have access to force plates, I was wondering if there was a way they could correlate that over and then understand what was happening if you were to put that athlete on force plates.
Yeah. That would be extremely useful, right? That might put him out of business though. Uh,
I'm not looking at they don't sponsor me. I don't care.
yeah, right.
You know,
Yeah. I mean, this seems like a little too simple because it's the same exercise. But I imagine if I'm thinking about the people who are in each group and I think about them doing a just a weighted squat jump, pretty light with dumbbells, I bet I could see the people at least who are not good at converting that eccentric to concentric. They're just going to sit in the hole. They can't explode out of it. Um, as far as like who could handle that eccentric, that initial drop, that one would be really hard to spot with an exercise.
I think it would. I've been thinking about it a lot. I wonder if like your squatters that have a big butt wink
Yeah,
because they're not stopping, let's say they're not stopping the squat with their hip flexors.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah,
the eccentric brake's not there. And so they're letting everything carry back around and through, and it's giving that excessive drop. I wonder if them would be your eccentrically poor athletes. but I don't
Yeah.
know.
Oh man, I wish I had the list in front of me. I do know here's what I do see though. I did notice this trend is the people who were a lot of the people who struggled in the load, like in that initial eccentric, were usually the people that really had trouble with depth in the squat. They're all the people who, the moment we go to squat max, they want to cheat. They want to cheat. Yeah, and sometimes you get you know the weight's five a little bit too heavy, and you do it well, you just can't quite go there. But the people who are consistently trying to cheat that movement pattern, I noticed a lot of them were in that first load category of they can't handle the eccentric part. I do see that.
And that would make sense. They know they're going to be weak down there, so don't go down
They
there.
don't want to go there. Yeah, they don't want to go there.
Then you start
I
getting
also,
you start getting neural pathways. Then
yeah,
your body
yeah,
feeling safe and all that. It opens up bigger rabbit holes.
it really does. I don't know if there's i- when you're observing it, there's so much more to it that I don't know if you could ever apply that solution that is that basic when there's so much more going on. I would also imagine that the group in that first category that are struggling with that load, that dropping part of the vert. Um, this is just a guess, but if I were to have them do tempo squats, they'd probably struggle with those too. They'd probably struggle with a 5 second tempo. I mean, everyone does a little bit. Those are not fun, but I'm sure that they would have, I'd see a lot in that group take 4 seconds, lowering the first 50% and then 1 second down at the bottom. They just don't want to be down there.
I I'm going to look at it more and then see how it maybe lines up with what I think, and it might actually help that we do have an athlete in common. So then over the summer,
Yeah,
I could gain a little bit of ground.
for sure. I'm curious to see what happens with what box Sadie's in. Oh, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to say her name, but
Oh, yeah, it's fine.
okay. What box she's in, because again, or her issue is such importance, or carries over onto the track. So we're trying to fix it on the track. We're trying to fix it in the weight room. So if we get to the point where I see that improvement on the track, I wonder if we went back and look at the numbers if she's no longer there.
That's what I wonder, and then correlate everything back around, and then now you have a athletic growth model that you can work
Yeah, for
with.
sure. I mean, it's one thing to keep them out of dysfunction for the sake of injury. It's another thing to move their dysfunction over to performance benefits, actual
Which
movement
at the end of the
benefits.
day, that's what's keeping you
That's
employed, right? So yeah,
yeah, that's the goal, right? Yeah.
this next question kind of gets into what we were just discussing, but creating a development ladder. How are you developing or looking at how to develop your athletes over the course of 4 to 5 years, depending on the red shirt and all of that?
Yeah, I think where we start is with every athlete is I have to start with making them decent athletes before we get into how they high jump or triple jump or throw the jab. Um, the first place we start is whether or not they can do these base of the pyramid skills. Acceleration is one of them. Even if they're a high jumper and they don't really need to go deep into those acceleration angles and efforts. Um, the understanding, like I said in the beginning, it's sort of the Rosetta Stone for me. It teaches everything. Um, so once we understand acceleration, then so much of it becomes easy to teach. So much of any event, the rhythm, the efforts, the understanding of how to push yourself up into the proper position. So when it comes to development, the first place I'm starting is rhythm, because that would be the first kind of building block of acceleration is rhythm and coordination. I do a lot with freshmen, just giving them varying their drills sometimes, just to see almost as little movement screens to see who's coordinated, who's uncoordinated, where do we need to start? Because if someone's very, very uncoordinated, that's where I've got to start before I even get into an Olympic lift, or at least putting too much stock into the Olympic lifts benefit for performance. Before I even get into the technical stuff, they've got to be good athletes first. They've got to be good athletes. So some of the things I'm looking for in that is, can we just do our basic set of drills coordinated. Are they having issues with coordination? Um, the other thing is, I would say, when it comes to the weight room, is a squat and an RDL pattern. Those are huge. I mean, even our top people still sometimes need to work with that. But like acceleration on the track, squat pattern and the hinge pattern of the RDL is the Rosetta Stone for me of all the stuff we do. If they understand that, then everything's a slight, modification there. So it's really all about getting them to understand coordination and its role, that you can't just come out here and we got a C skip and you're not good at it, but you're not competing in the C skip, right? So it doesn't matter. It's like, no, at this level, I want to be able to get to the point where you can, because it's going to make everything else 10 times easier if you become more coordinated. So the beginning is, I know it's D1 track and it sounds nice and fancy and high level, but really it's coordination and understanding how to be an athlete before we worry about how to be a track athlete. And then from there, it's after that, if we're gotten to the point where we are a good athlete, then actually most of their career is just continuing to improve those base athlete qualities. Um, Strength to weight ratio, how well they can coordinate that new strength in things like shot put tosses. There's a really good correlation for me in my experience to overhead back and underhand forward shot tosses. Um, we would just go over to the shot put rink and throw them off the toe board there. But I see big correlation in, if that rises, I see some pretty good marks. Like I used to do it, and I haven't done it in a while, but I'll probably start again this year. When I tested the week before our December meet, every single athlete who improved in those tests came out and improved in terms of sometimes PRs, but usually in their opener. Everyone who was about the same was around the same as what they opened up, and everyone who was lower didn't come out, because they might be better at their event, but they are not as powerful of an athlete. Um, so most of it actually, after this kind of basic rudimentary level of getting them coordinated, is just upping the athletic skills, the strength, the speed, the stamina. Um, I think that's just undervalued. I think people get caught up in the perfect technique and all these gadgets and tricks, but it's the most undervalued thing is, are they a stud athlete?
That would make a lot of sense. And like you said, at the D1 level, you don't think about going back down to grab those things, but
Yeah,
I'm sure it is needed.
yeah, for sure. That's where most of my time is those, and that's why I test in those. Power testing is not just to motivate them, not to you understand that those things need to improve or whatever, just for the sake of improving. It shows me that they're becoming a better athlete, because they're pretty, I mean, other than standing triple jump, they're pretty rudimentary. There's not a lot of technical component to those things. I just want them to become better and more powerful athletes. And from there, I always tell them the pyramid of performance, the base is that power development. The bigger and wider that pyramid is, the higher the top of that pyramid. And we spend a lot of time on the top trying to get a higher top, but it's really the base. It's really the base for me. So it's all about that for me in terms of progress. I'm just trying to progress those things. And even though that may mean we don't spend as much time hammering event or rep after rep after rep of our event, the base of the pyramid is so much wider that even at the same proficiency, they've just got a bigger engine for the event. And eventually, you got to be really good once you get to become a very, very stud athlete, you do have to become very, very efficient at the technical components. I remember Dan Paff saying, I quote him a lot. He's a big influence of mine. But he said, like, working with pros, it's delicate. He said it's like rolling up toothpaste, right? When you're younger, you can do anything, and toothpaste, you can throw it against the wall, toothpaste is gonna come out. You step on it, toothpaste is gonna come out. But once you get to the end of that roll, you got to be very meticulous about the way you roll it up, right? To get anything out of it. I just don't. We just don't get athletes that are that superior and developed. Um, so it's not as much into being perfect with those techniques and then having a perfect peaking plan and all this kind of stuff. Really, it's just be a better athlete. Be a better athlete.
Going from as general as possible that has carryover to finally as specific as you can be
Yeah,
with carryover.
yeah. I would say their development over their career is very similar to their development over a single year. Um, yeah, it's kind of developing that base in a single year. We would call that work capacity or a base. But in terms of a career, you may look at that first year as I just have to learn how to be as good an athlete as my level that I'm competing at. When I look around at these D1 meets and I see these studs, can I compete with these people if they are if they can out jump me, out throw me, out sprint me? I mean, sprinting is an event, but maybe that's not a good example. But if you look at the basic athletic qualities and those tests that go along with it, if they're just blowing you away there, you may be great at your event work, but you don't have the engine for it.
You had touched on this just a little bit in the start of this, but you were talking about setting goals or helping athletes find goals in there at the beginning, just a little, but identifying the goal driven athlete and figuring out how to support them. That they think a little bit different. I know we would like to think every athlete's a goal driven athlete, but I
Yeah.
don't know that all of them are.
No.
I think some cling to those goals a lot harder than others do. So
Oh, no doubt.
it's almost like a literal thinker over
Yeah.
somebody that doesn't take everything literal. How how do you kind of support that athlete?
The ones that are hyper fixated on the goals are it's a blessing and a curse, right? Because if they're hyper fixated on those goals, they're going to be very intentful with what they're doing. They've got that goal, that number in the back of their mind. The challenge is actually competing and teaching them how to compete performance oriented and not outcome oriented. Um, so early on, those really goal setting type athletes, we do talk a lot about goals, and I do use the actual numbers, the outcome goals, as a way to motivate them, and constant feedback in terms of those power testings. Are we getting closer to here's kind of the general range of whatever your goal is. Let's say a 47-meter jav thrower. Here's generally the ballpark that they are in terms of their strength and power. We can tell we can compare you to them. So I use it to motivate them a lot. But once it comes competition time, we have to switch and become very performance oriented. If we're competing with outcome oriented, it's going to fall apart real quick. In some events more than others. So I would say with those people, it is using it to motivate them early on and through that process. Like right now, Sadie is a very goal oriented athlete. And I'm using that. I'm using that to my advantage. We're always talking about, what is going to take the place in the multi. She's got in our workout binders, she's got the top 8 right in the front page. So every time she sees it for the workout of the day, she's there motivated. And through this process of fall, uh, for me, it's about figuring them out, like learning how to talk to them, what they are receptive to, um, how best to handle the good days, how best to handle the bad days, so that I kind of have the tools to once we get into competition season, I can be a part of flipping that. If I just say flip it and I just coach the same, it's going to be very, very difficult. So I have to figure them out in the fall, so that when we do try and flip it to more performance based thinking instead of goal based thinking, I can speak their same language and get them to understand that. So I know it's not a very specific answer, like get to know them and figure it out, but I would say handling this super goal oriented, it is a lot of the mental game because that's the source of it is the mental side. Um, so I think you have to combat that with the mental side.
Now, as we was getting ready for this, I know you had some recruiting stuff you were involved in, so that led to this last little group of questions before I let you go for tonight. But I've got athletes out here that are starting to go on visits and starting to do things. So let me get your perspective on some stuff, and maybe it'll help somebody
For
else
sure.
out there. Recruiting athletes, what are you evaluating past skill? You know they're good, or you wouldn't be talking to them.
Yeah.
What else are you looking at?
Um, I mean, there are certain, when you're looking at those qualities, I kind of break it up into two categories. There are past the physical, the idea, what are their PRs, who they are, uh, what motivates them, how they've handled setbacks, all that kind of stuff. It's kind of broken up into two categories. There's one that I would say I'm observing you as an individual athlete and some of the things I want that I know I can coach best. And then there is does does it fit with our team? They're kind of two different perspectives, right? Um, so past the PRs, I kind of look for people who are nerds for the sport. That's one category. If they're a nerd for the sport itself, that's great. If they are extremely, like Sadie, extremely goal driven, um, or this is a weird one, and I've just seen a lot of carryover. If there's someone who is a multi-sport, or they have a job, or have just done a little bit more than what is maybe necessary to get by. If they have any one of those three, there's a pretty good chance when I get them in college, they're going to be able to be self-motivated. I'm not going to have to drag them for success. So that first one, whether they're a track nerd or a nerd for sports, I know they have a passion for it, which means they're going to enjoy the process. The people who are goal driven, like Sadie, they're just dogs, right? I don't have to drag you to success against your will. And then the people who are multi-sport athletes or work or do volunteer activities, they are really good at managing, not only managing their schedule and their time, but they've got a leg up in understanding that success takes sacrifice. They've had to sacrifice. If you work a job, you got to tell your friends, hey, I can't go do this thing tonight. I got to work because I want this thing, this car or whatever. Like, or if you're a multi-sport athlete, you just know you have less time to dedicate to anything, social hour or maybe even family stuff sometimes than maybe someone else. And that's going to be asked of you at this level. So it's you're going to fit in easier. It's not going to be so much friction in trying to teach you that. You have those three things. I like I like having one of those three things. If you have one of those three things, I'm already going to think that you're an athlete I want to coach for sure. And then in evaluating whether or not they fit with the team, that is very difficult to comment on because that's going to be kind of what team culture you have and what vibe you have. Um, and that one's hyper specific. It's hard to answer because every team has their own culture and their own uh, standard and vibe that you're going for. Some are all the way over here in the Patriot way, where it's just no fun and all business. And there's some that are over in the other end. I'm from Washington, so I'm a Seahawks fan. There are the Pete Carrolls. You got to love competing, and it's all fun. And so in evaluating whether they fit on your team, obviously every team's going to look for something different because they're going to fall on either end of the spectrum. I'll say for us, I'm a little more towards that Pete Carroll side of, if you have those three things that I mentioned earlier, you're probably going to be someone who enjoys the process and enjoys competing. So you're kind of fitting the way I like to coach. I like this thing to be fun. I want this thing to be fun, but not at the expense of quality reps, intentful reps, and quite honestly, point like PRs. Like you know what I mean? You've got to want to be successful, and you've got to enjoy the process of doing it. That's kind of where I fit. I can make it as fun as you want, as long as you train hard and want to be there and want to compete. If your idea of fun sacrifices how well you're training, um, that's not what I'm talking about when I say fun. So I'm just looking for athletes that really just enjoy competing. And if you go on a visit and you see that vibe in person, when you see us practice and you like that, then that's fantastic. But there's plenty of recruits that on paper are great. They're great PRs, but they don't fit in. And they may have those three things I mentioned earlier, but they don't fit in with the vibe. They're looking for something more the Patriot way, all business, all that. and that's totally fine. Like I think you could be successful in either one. It's just about finding a good fit. So if there are any, high school coaches or high school athletes that pay attention to this, um, that is going to determine not just your success, but your quality of life and happiness for those 4 years, is whether or not they're running the program in a way that fits you. One's not any more successful than the other, but it does create a very different experience.
So now you've talked to the athlete, you kind of got a feel for what you're expecting. They show up on campus for a visit. How should they present themselves? Like, they show up in track shorts, t-shirt, they show up in a polo, they show up, how would you expect a D1 recruit to look when they walk onto your campus to see what you have to offer them?
Well, if mom and dad's already wearing a Missouri State shirt, that's always going to win you points. It's happened a couple of times, but in reality, I'm not too concerned about the way. I really haven't had any issues with the way anyone presents themselves physically. Maybe I'm fortunate in that. I don't know if other coaches have experienced situations where they just present themselves in a way where uh, they just don't look like they care. I'm not really even sure what that would look like, but for me, it's like, you're a track athlete. I'm so used to the college track athletes just dressing like athletes to class, and that's how they show up to practice and stuff. So, um, I wouldn't say I have any sort of thoughts on the wrong way to dress or the wrong way to present yourself. I'm maybe fortunate enough to have never experienced what wrong is, so I can't really define it.
That's good enough. I mean, you don't know. Everybody may have an idea in their mind of what they want to see from an athlete. Maybe they want to see
Yeah,
somebody, casual, but not too casual,
yeah. I'm
or
sure, like, if they're wearing pajamas or something, I don't know. Maybe I'd be like, we're both putting on a little bit of our best performance here, as a coach to sell the thing, and as an athlete to sell yourself. So maybe pajamas and like slippers or something, I'd be like, I don't know what this is, but I've never experienced it.
I just, I wasn't sure. Yeah, show up in pajama pants, Crocs, and a baggy sweatshirt or something like that. And you're like, well, this isn't Walmart at 1 o'clock in the morning. Come on now.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know,
I guess I could see that being a little, question mark. It wouldn't make me say no, but it would make the question mark start right off the bat, you know.
I can definitely believe that. And I, I, I think anybody that's there and it's at that level would present themselves in a way that you would expect. But
For sure.
a lot of kids don't know and they don't have a lot of direction.
Yeah,
Some kids just make it out of their environment with very little help. So
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I just think no matter how hard you try to be authentic, to give them a real look into what you do and how you coach, you just can't take the element of putting on your best, putting your best foot forward, or being a little performative in how you're selling yourself. I don't think you can completely eliminate that. Um, so if you're a student athlete coming for a visit, um, we're probably assuming that you want to show yourself off too, that you're not the gift, that we are trying to pursue. It's a little bit of both. So I guess, just understanding that if you present yourself in a way that makes you look like you don't care how you present yourself to us, is probably not a good start. Whether it means anything about your performance and who you are as a person, and whether or not you will continue on to be a great student athlete, maybe it has no bearing on that at all. But if we get the sense that you don't want to impress us, or maybe that's not the right word. Uh, that sounds a little highbrow, but you don't want us to think well of you. You don't care. Then it's question marks already.
well, coach, I kept you on here for quite a while. I had a
Oh
wonderful
man, this has
time.
been great.
We
We talked about this earlier. I could talk coaching for hours, man.
You and me both, and I realized that sometimes you have a limited time. We're getting late in the evening. You got to coach tomorrow and things like that. I always try to be respectful of somebody that wanted to sit down and at least take a little bit of time. But
Yeah, yeah.
I
No,
got
I loved
plenty
it.
of questions. We can do this again sometime.
Yeah, I'd love it. I'd love it. And there's probably quite a few things that I would come back with. There's a things I've taken from you to steal, updates on how that Sparta work is going to go, how well we do at moving people out of those dysfunctions. Yeah, there's totally a lot we could do.
Well, I appreciate your time, and I'm sure we'll be in communication, and we'll see where this thing goes.
Sweet. Thank you, man. I appreciate your time. This has been great.
I'm glad. Have a great evening.
Thanks. You too.